Good morning. Today is the 24th day of Tammuz and the 13th of July. In Tehillim we say the Hallel in Tehillim from chapter 115 and on. Or 114 and on? 114 and on, sorry. Okay. We're continuing with this mimer from Reb Hillel. Dinei, we're in this last paragraph of page 5. דהנה למה שאל משה תם על הגלות בשעה ששב אל עדני אחרי שאמרו אליו ירא השם עליכם וישפוט? When did Moshe begin to question? When did he ask his two questions, which we now know are different questions? Right? What are the two questions really? One of them is, why in the world is there exile? Because there's no punishment in this. There was no sin that was committed that it deserves an exile. That's the first thing. The second thing is, why does it get harder the further along it proceeds? It should get easier. We'll talk about that in a moment. It's not the atchalot. This is the end. The normal way is that in the beginning it's tough. Okay. That's the normal way, but it'll give us an even deeper analysis of this now. So when did Moshe actually ask these questions? I sort of jumped the second question, but it's okay. You would have figured it out anyway. It's not such a mystery. So when did he ask him? After he met the Jewish guards, or the four men who were in charge of the work. No. This is not. No, this is not the Nuksim Ba'am. Is not the Tan V'Aviram. No. We'll look later. But now let's see what it says. So the taskmasters and overseers of the people went out and said to the people, "Thus says Pharaoh," and so on and so forth. And then they see, when do they meet Moshe? On the second page here, ויפגעו את משה ואת אהרון ניצבים לקראתם בצאתם מאת פרעה. Now the overseers of the Israelites found themselves in trouble because of the order. And as they left Pharaoh's presence, they came upon Moses and Aaron standing in their path. And they said to them, "May Yahweh look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, putting a sword in their hands to slay us." And then, after that exchange, that's when Moshe asks his questions. Because Moshe's, it's not important, it's immaterial to the discussion. You do it later. Because Moshe thought that the exile was a punishment, being in Egypt, enslaved in Egypt, was a punishment for something, that there's no punishment without sin. לכן חקר לידע שורש הדין ושורת הדין. דיני ידוע, so he wanted to know what was the reason. שמההנהגה האנושית התחתונה יכולים להבין איך ההנהגה למעלה. Because the way the things are below, the order of things in human life indicates how it is spiritually also. There is a correlation between the two. An exact correlation. What you see down here in human life, things that make sense, not things that don't make sense. Even the things that don't make sense also have a correlation above. But the point is that you can learn what goes on above from what happens below. And normal human behavior, ההנהגה האנושית התחתונה, is one thing, and from that you extrapolate to how it is above. רק שאצלנו הדבר מוטבע בחיק הבריאה העליונה, ולמעלה הוא בדרך בחירה ורצון. What's the difference? The only difference is that down here, in human behavior, it is enrooted since creation. It's nature. We call it nature. This is human nature.
Enrooted. Where did you make that one up?
From Webster's.
What does it mean?
It's enwedged and rooted. It's
You mean rooted?
enrooted even.
Not enrooted. Enrooted.
And we'll check it and see if it's a word. Above, it's out of choice. Hashem is free to guide the world however He wants. So by us, we have to cope with the way things are. And this is what makes life mainly difficult. Why? Because as long as you're rooted below, as long as you're connected only below, what do you see? You only see a world of necessity. It has to be this way. The moment that you rise above, you rise to freedom of choice. The way it is by Hashem, it's freedom of choice. So there's like people like to say this about tzaddikim. They say that they're not governed by the rules of nature. Rather, things happen to them because they want it to happen. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean that something else could have happened? That's how most people understand it. The way I understand it is that by him it's not a feeling of being coerced into this situation. Rather, he feels that this is part of the divine choice. And he enjoys that same feeling, that this is a choice. When it's a choice...
Why don't you say it's simpler?
Okay.
It's not nature that's governing him. It's he is governing nature.
So that's one way to say it, but it doesn't... that leaves it as if he could choose nature to be some other way. And that's not what it means. It doesn't mean that he chooses that nature act differently. He's not going to turn the moon going backwards. Okay? By a normal person. Every person can reach this level. The level is that I live the world as if it's choice, not coercion, not necessity. It's a change in the way I think. Otherwise, why is he going to tell me? What do I care? Let's say there's somebody who has superhuman powers and he can do things backwards. He can make the moon spin in the other direction. You know it spins once a month. But he's going to make it go the other direction. And so that way we'll see the dark side of the moon. So what do I care? It's not me.
Hey, Joshua did it.
So I'm not Joshua. What do I care? What do I care? Okay, he did that. Very nice for him. How is that related to me? What lesson do I have to learn from this? The lesson that every person can learn from this is it depends where your consciousness is. If your consciousness is rooted here below, you live a life of coercion. If your consciousness is rooted above, you live beyond that. And you could say that that's the entire message of Torah. It's constantly, the world moves because there's a certain direction, there's a certain vector that God put it in. And it's going to develop in that direction, whether you like it or not. The question is, are you going to identify with the entrapped person who's stuck here, or are you going to identify with God himself? And by God, it's freedom. It's not coercion. Nothing forces him to do it this way or that way. It's a question of identity. When I identify with my divine soul, I'm identifying with choice. Okay? I'm identifying, because somebody could come along and say, he'll look at my 80, 90, 120, who knows how many years, and he'll look at it and he'll say, every choice that he made was not a choice. It was forced upon him by the conditions of his life. Okay? And he might be right. Because from the outside, that's what you see. But I didn't experience life that way. What did I experience? I experienced choice. I experienced something different. It's a question of identity. It's a question of perspective. So he says, when you have the higher perspective, how do you see the world? And you see the world as something that is being guided by choice. Whose choice? Hashem's choice. But now I identify with that. So what do I feel? That the world's a good place. It's all by choice. You follow what I'm saying? It's a psychological argument also.
I think it's a spiritual argument.
It's a spiritual argument also.
Do what Hashem wants.
Right,
Hashem
right.
does what you want.
Again, that's what it feels like. ולכן הטביע בנו השם מטבח טבע זו, כדי שנדע על ידי זה איך ההנהגה למעלה. So in other words, why did Hashem, this is like what the Alter Rebbe said about his wife, והוא ימשול בך, that he will learn parables from you. What's the parable? That whatever she said to me, that's what they're saying above now. Except I have to translate it from being a statement that a wife will say to her husband to something that Hashem is now decreeing above. I have to make that translation. That's why what she's saying is a parable. And v'hu yimshol bach, he will take mishalim from you.
But everything that everybody says to you.
100%, but everything that happens to you. Right? Except that here you have to say that my wife is my nature. I have like my being, and my nature is reflected to me by my wife. She shows me my nature. Other people don't necessarily always show me their nature. Sometimes they're showing me their nature. But with a husband and wife, it's like one person, and you have to treat it that whatever she's saying to me, she's reflecting my innermost nature. And I need to learn from that. As we learn from the verse, and this is one of the understandings of this verse in Chasidus, that the way that water is to the face, okay, where you're reflected, so the face of man is to the face of another man. That you see yourself reflected there. כמו שאצלנו מודבש אותה מידה שמתעורר בליבו על זולתו, מתעורר בלב זולתו, גם כן באותה מידה עצמה. כמו שמראה לאדם תנועה ופנים שחיבה, התעורר אהבת חברו אליו. And because this touches the heart, then whatever face I show you, then you show me back. Why? Because there's a connection between the hearts. The hearts in the end are really one. The faces are different. Right? What does it say? Kashem shepartzufehem shonim, deotehen shonot. That just as their faces are different, so their consciousness is separate. But the hearts are not that way. In the heart, which is deeper, there is still a residue of the unity of Hashem's oneness. That's in the heart. And so what do you see? You see that even though people make faces, in the end they do the same thing. Even though they make faces like, I'm not like this, I'm like that, in the end everybody does exactly the same thing. So you look at the governments in Israel, right? And what do you see? No, you don't have to, but they show their face to you all the time. So what do you see? That they have different faces. Each one says I'm something different, but they all do the same thing exactly. That's why the whole thing is such one big farce. Because what causes them to do what they do is that they share the same heart. What's their heart? The same thing, the same media, everything is the same. There's no original thought there. It's all the same. It's just a question of, will we move the cheese today or move it tomorrow? Will we spin it in a clockwise direction or a counterclockwise direction? But they all say exactly the same thing. And you see that with the judicial reform now. That everybody agreed 8 months ago. 10 months ago, a year ago, everybody agreed. But now, because you can make political value, what? No, you can use it like by budding the government. You get like more power. So they'll oppose something that a year ago they were for.
That's called chicanery.
Okay, I don't know why it's called chicanery. And I'll tell you, I want to say hon politi. Like, I guess, political capital is how you say it in English. So you can make political capital from opposing something that you agreed to a year ago. Why? Because now I can make something from it. What do I care? But the hearts are really one. They're all in the same place. In the end, they'll all do the same thing. There's no difference. To really get something new, you have to go above. You have to go to where there's free will. Where's the free will? By Hashem. It's not here. Here you'll find that everybody does the same. What? That's first.
Peace is made above.
Okay. And if it's made there, then you can bring it down here. So, but in any case, he's sticking this in here because I think that he also wants to on the way, he wants to teach us basics of Chasidus. This is not the main question here, but he wants to explain this so that people understand this. Just as a person shows a nice face to his friend, he will awaken with liking him. When he shows him anger, so his friend becomes angry at him. He wanted to get to this, which is also not exactly part of the essay, but it's a very important thing. And this is where it was one of the bases from which the Rebbe took the whole thing about bitachon. Right? That when a person acts with bitachon, he acts with confidence. And confidence is dependent, talui b'midat ha'ava dafka. Why? Because confidence is netzach, and love is in chesed. So they're on the same axis, one above the other. And really, they all depend in the end on chokhmah. But in any case, when a person acts with confidence, so here he's saying, it depends on, I have confidence, I have trust in someone who I know loves me, who cares for me. And again, love is not the romantic love, it's affinity, he has a connection. And he trusts him to do what he wants. So then when a person acts with confidence towards someone else, Hashem brings down confidence from above. What does that mean? He brings down the confidence, meaning that the other person would also treat him with trust and with confidence. But if a person acts with too much vigilance, and he's afraid, he's suspicious of everything, and especially of God, because now he's going to bring right? This is the real story behind Job. What happened with Job? Eov. What was his problem? So he says here, so we said this before, that Job was over vigilant, overly afraid of God. He was only God-fearing. If you're only God-fearing, what do you come to? You come to a state of suspicion. What do you mean? We did. You remember in a second. Every week, at the end of the week, he would bring sacrifices for each of his children. He had 7 boys and 3 girls. And he brought for each one of them a sacrifice. If, God forbid, they had sinned somehow that week during their honoring God, he was overly, like, what we call today, what? He had a problem. He was overly anxious. And when you're anxious, it's not just anxiety doesn't just come out of nowhere, because you don't trust Hashem. You don't trust Hashem. If you don't, what do you think? Hashem's out to get you? Well, what are you living like that for?
You don't trust Hashem. You don't have trust in Hashem.
Because you don't love Hashem. That's what he's saying. That the trust, confidence depends on love. Because that's what comes first. If you love Hashem, you also have to be God-fearing. You have to do a cheshbon every day. But every day you say, slach lanu, I'm finished. You don't go crazy all the time, like living in tremendous anxiety. What's going to be? What's going to be? I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that when you act only out of fear, then the midat adin pogea bo. Then the din, the judgment, strikes back at you, because you bring upon yourself what you're calling, right? The way you're acting. He says himself, I've never slept quietly. Chizkiyahu was the last king of Judah, and he had Sancheriv on his doorstep, and he says, I have nothing I can do. I can't win a war against this army, like 200,000 people. And one thing I can do, I can go to sleep. How does going to sleep show anything? It shows that you have confidence. I have confidence in you, so I trust you because I love you. And we will continue tomorrow.